The rope was already cutting into my throat when the horse hit the edge of the square. I heard the hooves before I saw the rider. Good. I could still hear even though my vision had started shrinking into a dark tunnel, and the executioner had already pulled the lever halfway. The royal rider shouted for the mechanism to stop. The executioner stopped. The rope did not. For 3 very long seconds I hung there, with my toes scraping uselessly against the wooden platform, while 2 guards fought the release bar. By the time they dropped me onto the boards, I was coughing hard enough to see sparks. That was the king's idea of mercy. Kesten barony. The royal clerk read the amended sentence while I lay on my side, trying to breathe. My conviction remained. My right to return to court was gone. My claim on the Serrat family estates was suspended. I had 90 days to restore Kesten to the minimum tax output required of a royal frontier holding. If I failed, the barony returned to the crown. If I died, it returned even faster. The crowd laughed when the clerk reached the name Kesten. That told me more than the tax figures did. I had heard of Kesten. 3 lords in 11 years. 1 fled, 1 died of fever. The last died under his own collapsed stable. Apparently hanging me had started to feel wasteful. I left before sunset with 1 tired horse, 2 bored guards, and the clothes I had been arrested in. 2 days later, Kesten's broken gate came into view. 1 tower leaned outward. Half the houses near the wall were dark. The gate was open because one side had lost its hinge. I did not get a welcoming crowd. I got 12 prisoners on their knees. They were lined up in the town square with their hands tied behind them. 6 men, 4 women, 2 boys old enough to work, but not old enough to hide how scared they were. A split grain sack lay in front of them. A woman in worn teal armor stood beside the line, with 17 soldiers behind her. That was Clara Mendez. I did not know her name yet, but I noticed 3 things immediately. Her sword had been sharpened so many times, the edge was narrower than it should have been. Her left gauntlet had been repaired twice, and when I entered the square, every soldier looked at her before they looked at me. That told me who actually ran Kesten. Clara gave me the short version. The prisoners had broken into the dead baron's grain store. The old law required hanging for theft from a lord's emergency reserve. The store held less than 3 weeks of grain. She needed my ruling before sundown. I looked at the prisoners. Then something inside my head changed. There was no voice, no glowing window, no helpful God explaining my future. I simply knew 2 things. Kesten was mine. And Kesten had 612 citizens. The number sat in my mind as naturally as knowing how many fingers I had. Under it was another number. 612 available citizen credits. I stood very still. Clara probably thought the rope had damaged my brain. I tested the knowledge without moving. I thought about one of the prisoners leaving Kesten forever. The number changed. 611. I thought about him sleeping outside the border for a night, and coming back. Still 612. I thought about forcing a stranger into a house and calling him a citizen. Nothing. The rule was simple enough that I almost laughed. Every person who genuinely considered my territory home gave me 1 credit every sunrise. That meant the 12 people kneeling in front of me were not grain thieves. They were 12 daily credits. More importantly, they were future credits. Years of them. Executing 12 healthy adults and near adults over 1 stolen sack of grain was insane. I asked Clara how much grain they had taken. She showed me the sack. I asked whether anyone had died because of it. No. I took the knife from the executioner's belt and cut the first prisoner's rope myself. Clara's hand moved toward her sword. The soldiers stiffened. The prisoner just stared at me. I cut the second rope, then the third. By the 6th, the square had gone completely quiet. I told Clara the executions were cancelled. The grain store would be opened under guard. Every household would receive a ration that night. Anyone who stole extra after that would work it off instead of hanging. Her expression did not improve. She explained that the store was already too low. I told her dead farmers produced even less grain. I finished cutting the ropes. One of the older women started crying. Then she knelt. The man beside her knelt too. Within seconds, half the square was kneeling. I had been Baron of Kesten for less than 10 minutes, and somehow people were already looking at me like I had performed a miracle. I had questions, mostly about how the previous lords had managed to set the bar this low. What I did not know was that a rider had left Orsena behind me the same afternoon I left the scaffold. He reached my brother Thomas before I reached Kesten. Thomas read the notice confirming that I had survived the execution and accepted the barony. He was not worried. Years later I saw the account from one of our old estate clerks. Thomas spent less than a minute on the report before ordering my remaining share of 2 family storehouses moved under his control. His reasoning was simple. I had survived the rope. Kesten would finish the job. Back in the square, Clara was still trying to decide whether I was brave, stupid, or dangerous. Then a woman pushed through the crowd, carrying a boy with blue lips. That changed the problem. The boy was maybe 8. His skin was damp with fever. His mother kept saying he had been fine 3 days earlier. Then another woman pointed toward the central well. I followed her. The stone rim looked normal from a distance. Up close, there was a greasy blue-green line around the inside. Dead insects floated near the bucket rope. The water smelled faintly metallic. Clara told me they had been boiling it, but there was not enough firewood to do that for everyone. The old southern well had collapsed last winter. The stream outside the wall ran clean only after heavy rain. 400 people, 17 soldiers, less than 3 weeks of grain. One bad well. I had enough. I did not need a tour of every broken roof. I put my hand on the stone. The knowledge returned. This was public property belonging to Kesten. I could spend credits on it. Sunrise was still hours away, but the credits were already there. Kesten had generated them that morning. When the title became mine, the day's reserve came with it. 612 credits. I could strengthen my body, improve my reflexes, increase my mana, make myself harder to kill. Considering the rope marks on my neck, that option had a certain charm. Or I could spend almost all of it on the well. I looked at the boy again. He was shaking now. I did the arithmetic. 1 stronger body was useful. 600 healthy people were much more useful. I spent 500 credits on the well. Warm gold lines spread under my hand and sank into the old stone. The entire square stepped back. Something moved deep below us. Not an explosion, more like the ground taking one heavy breath. The rope trembled. The bucket dropped 2 inches. Then clear water pushed upward from the shaft. The blue-green film vanished first. The water level rose until it sat higher than it had when I arrived. Marta Seno, the town healer, shoved past 3 soldiers, filled a cup, smelled it, tasted 1 drop, then filled another. She did not smile. She just started ordering people to bring every clean container they owned. Good. Marta was already moving. Clara stared at the water, then at me. I had 112 credits left. I also had no idea who had arranged my sentence, why I had this power, or whether Count Davor Kelm across the border knew Kesten was still alive. But the boy's mother was crying into his hair, while Marta cooled his face with clean water. For the first time that day, my throat hurt less. By sunset, 3 old women had decided the well was sacred. By midnight, they had decided I was involved. I tried to stop that early. It did not work. The next morning, I woke in the dead Baron's manor to a number in my head. 612. Then 612 fresh credits settled behind that number. I sat up too fast and nearly fell off the bed. Daily income. The grain thieves were still inside the count. All 12 were alive. All 12 still considered Kesten home. And all 12 had just paid me a credit by doing nothing more complicated than waking up here. Yesterday they had been preparing to die. Today, they intended to stay. I was still trying to understand how much that changed, when someone knocked once and entered without waiting. Boro Pell was 57, thin, slightly bent, mostly bald, and wearing a mustard waistcoat covered in ink stains. 3 separate abacuses hung from straps across his chest. A small goat followed him. Boro introduced himself as Kesten's former census clerk, current unofficial census clerk, and future official census clerk, if I had any sense. The goat was Minister. Minister immediately ate the corner of the royal tax notice on my table. Boro watched him do it, and told me the animal had excellent instincts around government documents. Then, he dropped 6 rolled maps on my breakfast. That was how my first real planning meeting began. Boro had spent 20 years counting Kesten's people. More importantly, he had kept counting after they left. His maps showed the collapse in one glance. Kesten had not lost 3,000 people to graves. It had lost them to roads. Families had moved west, to Veza, south along the Resso, or on to Kelmland, where the wells worked and the taxes had once been lower. I stopped him there. The houses were still here. So were family graves, cousins, old property marks, and memories. Everyone else saw people who had left. I saw thousands of people who already knew what Kesten felt like when it was home. We did not need to convince strangers that Kesten could become home. We needed to give former Kesten families a reason to come back to a place that already was. Borel stared at me for several seconds. Then he pulled out a 4th abacus. I asked why he had not been wearing that one. He said it was for serious work. Minister ate more of the tax notice. While Boro and I were spreading old family maps across the table, Count Davor Kelm was receiving a much smaller report in Danor County. 3 tenant families had asked his steward for permission to leave. That was unusual enough to reach him personally. Kelm did not panic. He was not an idiot. At that point, Kesten was still a broken barony with 1 clean well and more problems than horses. He simply doubled the departure fee and ordered 2 road posts to record anyone traveling west. He believed poor people moved when lords moved them. That belief would cost him a lot. I spent the next day outside the manor. Boro took me through an abandoned street near the east wall, where more than half the doors still had family marks carved into the frames. One had 7 notches beside the lintel. Boro refused to kelp that house until I asked twice. He had a problem with the number 7. I never got a useful explanation. We rode 2 miles south after that and found a collapsed bakehouse beside the road. It had once served 4 surrounding hamlets. Boro knew where 37 former families from those hamlets now lived. Clara joined us with 4 soldiers. She had stopped looking at me like I was harmless. I preferred that. I asked Boro what had made those families leave. He listed 6 things: bad water, road mud, grain seizures, no healer, bandits, the old lord charging repair fees for houses he never repaired. I did not need 6 solutions. I needed the bottleneck. The well was already fixed. Marta was alive and useful. Grain seizures were finished because I had no interest in killing my own income. That left movement and food processing. So I used 90 of my new credits on the public bakehouse and 20 on the worst drainage cut in the road. The change was not dramatic like the well. It was better. The bakehouse chimney straightened. Cracked stone sealed. The old oven drew properly again. The road ditch deepened and the mud started draining before our eyes. Clara crouched and pressed her fingers into the road surface. She looked annoyed. I asked why. She explained that she had spent 3 years requesting labor for that drainage line. I told her I had spent 20 credits. I told her I had no intention of explaining that yet. She did not like that answer either. Still progress. Boro and Leo Perna, a 17-year-old messenger with too much energy and no respect for distance, carried our first return offers west that afternoon. They were simple. Any former Kesten family could reclaim an abandoned home without fee. Grain ration for the first 2 weeks, no back taxes, no execution for old debts, clean water guaranteed. I did not write anything about miracles. Leo handled that part without permission. 3 days later, the first wagons appeared. The first wagon belonged to a cooper named Enzo Larejo, his wife, his mother, and 4 children. They stopped outside the gate and did not come in. The children looked at the repaired road. His wife looked at the wall. His mother looked at the town well, where people were filling clean buckets without paying anyone. Enzo looked at Clara. He asked whether the amnesty was real. Clara looked at me before answering. A week earlier, that would have annoyed me. Now I understood what it meant. She was testing whether my rules still existed when they became inconvenient. I confirmed everything. Enzo drove through the gate. 4 more wagons followed before evening. At sunrise, my count rose from 612 to 629. 17 people. 17 new credits. The number was small. What came with those 17 people was not. The returned families took over empty houses. The cooper repaired 3 barrels for grain storage on his first day because that was his trade. His eldest daughter helped Marta at the clinic. His mother knew which abandoned orchard still produced pears, even though the road to it had vanished under weeds. One family had not given me only 17 credits. They had given me a cooper, help at the clinic, local food knowledge, and proof that coming back was possible. The credits were only the part I could feel directly. People brought the rest with them. Clara found me staring at Enzo repairing barrels and asked what I was smiling at. I told her the man was more valuable than gold. She looked at me for a long moment. That became a problem later. At the time, I meant it very literally. By the end of the week, 53 former residents had returned. Lio came back from his 3rd run with mud up to his knees, and stories much bigger than the messages I had sent. According to him, people in 2 western villages had heard that I personally carried sick children to the sacred well every morning. I had carried exactly 1 child, from the square to Marta's clinic. The distance was maybe 40 steps. Lio had somehow turned that into a pilgrimage. I told him to stop improving my reputation without permission. He nodded seriously. The next version of the story included my humility. I began to understand that this could get away from me. The next problem arrived on wheels. A wagon came through the south gate just before noon, with 1 wheel half burned away. The canvas cover was black on one side. 3 arrows were still stuck in the frame. A man lay inside, with blood soaking through his trouser leg. Nobody laughed. Marta took him immediately. The woman driving the wagon had 2 children with her, and a dark brand stamped into the wood near the axle. Clara recognized it. Kelm seizure mark. That made the situation very clear. The family had left Danor County without paying Count Kelm's new departure fee. His roadmen stopped them 5 miles east of our border, took their second horse, tried to turn them back, and fired when the driver refused. They had escaped only because another wagon overturned behind them and blocked the road. I looked at the burned canvas, then at the children. I was angry. Kelm could tax his road. He could dislike people leaving. He could complain to the crown. Burning families because they wanted another home was different. Clara expected me to send more guards across the whole border. That was the obvious answer. It was also impossible. I had 17 soldiers. Kesten's eastern line was almost 20 miles of woods, fields, and broken stone markers. If I spread the garrison, Kelm's men could choose where to hit. I would always be late. So I asked a different question. Where would frightened travelers go if the direct road became dangerous? Boro brought mats. Clara brought patrol notes. Juri Fen, our blacksmith, brought the answer by accident. There were only two paths a loaded wagon could use after heavy rain without losing an axle. The old orchard road in the south, and the raised quarry track in the north. Kelm's men could threaten the main road all they wanted. Fear would concentrate the travelers for me. I spent credits on two things. First, the old public guard post at the orchard crossing. The roof sealed, the shutters hardened, and the cracked cistern beneath it became usable again. Second, myself. Not much. Enough to make my legs faster, my balance cleaner, my eyes better at following motion. The change felt almost disappointing. No thunder, no giant aura. I just stepped off the guard post stairs and landed farther away than I expected. Clara noticed. She noticed everything. We put 6 soldiers on the orchard route, 5 on the quarry route, 4 at the gate, and kept 2 mounted messengers between them. Kelm's first group hit the orchard road the next evening. There were 7 of them in plain coats, with good boots, and identical knives. Bandits who dressed from the same tailor were always interesting. They tried to stop a pair of carts carrying 3 families. Our guard post bell rang. I reached them before Clara did. That surprised both of us. One of the roadmen swung a short saber at my head. I moved under it without thinking. My body was not yet strong enough to make me invincible, but it was fast enough that his second swing cut empty air. I took his wrist, turned, and put him face first into the mud. Another man lunged at my back. Clara's sword hit his blade so hard it spun into the ditch. The rest ran when our soldiers came through the trees. We caught 4. One had Kelm's stamped pay token in his boot. Physical evidence was convenient that way. Clara wanted to know how I had crossed 200 yards that quickly. I told her I had invested in myself. She asked whether that was what I called the well too. I admitted the wording worked for both. She rubbed her forehead. I think that was the moment she stopped trying to fit me into a normal category. The travelers entered Kesten before dark. At sunrise, all 11 counted. Kelm's intimidation had just earned me more credits. That gave me an idea I probably should have felt worse about. If he wanted to frighten people away from his roads, I could make sure the safest place to run was mine. We marked the 2 protected routes with green hearth ribbons. We put water barrels at the posts. I gave Leo 6 copies of a simple notice saying Kesten would not charge an entry fee and would not return families by force. I specifically told him not to add anything about divine protection. He looked offended that I would even suggest it. That worried me more than if he had argued. Boro found the old hearthmark the same afternoon. It was carved into a boundary stone beside the orchard road, almost hidden under moss. I had seen the shape before on the well and assumed it was decoration. Boro did not. He dragged me back to the census room and pulled a sealed copy of Kesten's founding charter from a box nobody had opened in years. The useful part fit into one sentence. Kesten had been founded after an old refugee war. Its charter allowed free households to settle under the barony's protection without paying another lord for permission first. A queen had written that rule because she needed people on an empty frontier. A century later, Telm was charging families to leave. I owned the one border territory whose old law said they could simply arrive. I asked Boro one thing. I wanted to know whether the seal was still recognized. It was. Now our green ribbons had royal law behind them. A few days later, Count Kelm received 4 reports in one morning. His men had successfully made travel on the main road frightening. Traffic had dropped. The problem was that the traffic had not gone back to Daenor. It had moved onto the 2 roads we were protecting. Kelm ordered his steward to close the market route to Kesten next. His logic still made sense inside his own world. Mine was starting to become more profitable. Returners kept arriving in small groups, and unrelated families had started using the protected roads even when nobody in Kesten had invited them. By the 3rd week, Kesten had 781 residents. The number mattered, but the square mattered more. 3 empty storefronts were open again. Yuri had 2 apprentices. Marta had a second healer who had returned from Veza. Children had taken over the dry side of the old fountain, because apparently a broken fountain was still excellent for climbing. The grain store was still too low, but the returning farmers had brought seed, tools, and carts. One evening we ate outside the old manor, because the dining room roof still leaked. Boro tried to count the soup bowls. He reached 7, stopped, and started again from the other end. Minister stole a cabbage leaf from his plate. Clara almost smiled. I noticed because she did not do it often. She also noticed me noticing. That ended the smile. I learned later that while we were eating soup, 2 of Kelm's road captains were standing in the dark near our southern marker, timing our patrol changes. They were not there to scare travelers anymore. They were measuring us. Kelm had already decided that fees were not enough. His next plan was to make the safe roads look unsafe too. That same evening, his steward was sitting in an Ordam reception room 60 miles west, and offering Vesha's father a much cleaner solution: marriage. If the Ordan house tied itself to Daenor County, Kelm would gain money, trade access, and a respectable reason to surround Kesten without calling it a siege. Vesha would gain a husband she had never asked for. Her father did not agree that night. He sent his daughter to inspect Kesten first. So while Kelm's men were measuring my patrols, a completely different problem was rolling toward me in a carriage with 6 horses. Her name was Vesha Ordan. I knew the Ordan family by reputation. They controlled vineyards and copperland west of the Resso, and had enough money to be polite to kings without needing to like them. She arrived wearing wine red, carrying a thin rapier, and followed by 14 servants, 4 guards, 2 maids, 3 furniture carts, and 1 man whose only visible duty was protecting a large potted lemon tree. I had been told she was coming to inspect Kesten on behalf of her father. I had not been told she intended to inspect it with furniture. Clara stood beside me at the gate. Neither of us said anything for a while. Vesha stepped down, looked at the repaired road, the busy square, the clean well, then at me. Her eyes stopped briefly on the rope scar at my neck, so she had researched me. She explained that her father was worried Kesten might collapse and disrupt Ordan trade before winter. Reasonable. Then servants carried a carved writing desk through my gate. I asked how long the assessment was expected to take. Vesha said she believed in being thorough. A bed frame followed the desk. Clara finally looked at me. I had survived an execution, a poisoned well, and armed roadmen. I had no plan for the bed frame. Vesha spent the afternoon doing exactly what she claimed she had come to do. That made her harder to dismiss. She inspected the granary, road posts, clinic, smithy, and well. She asked useful questions about trade and population. She noticed that our soldier count was too low before I mentioned it. She found the Kelm pay token in Clara's evidence box and understood what it meant immediately. She was not decorative trouble. She was competent trouble. Late in the afternoon, a boy from the returning families fell from a wagon near the gate and cut his head open. His mother panicked. I was closer than Marta, so I picked him up and carried him to the clinic. It was not dramatic. He weighed maybe 40 pounds. Blood ran down my sleeve. Marta cleaned the wound and said he would be fine. When I turned around, Vesha was standing in the doorway. She had gone very still. I assumed she was bothered by the blood. I was wrong. Years later, she admitted that was the exact moment she decided I was the only politically acceptable man she had ever met. At the time, all I saw was a dangerous noblewoman staring at me while I held a frightened child. I put him down as quickly as possible. That did not help. Vesha's first report left Kesten the next morning. I saw the copy much later. She called our finances unstable, our army too small, our roads suspiciously improved, and me much harder to dismiss than the court had been told. She left out the Kelm pay token. Then, she advised her father to delay every border deal until her inspection was finished. He did. Kelm had been trying to turn an arranged marriage into an alliance around my territory. Vesha delayed the whole thing before I even knew it existed. The delay did not stay inside the Ordan house. Kelm sent Tomas a copy of the postponement and asked what kind of support I had brought from Orsena. Tomas had expected Kesten to kill me quietly. Now another noble family was refusing to commit against me, and he did not know why. For the first time since the scaffold, my brother stopped waiting for news of my death and started asking for news about what I was doing. I knew none of that at the time. Her second useful act was much less subtle. She put another desk in my study. I removed it. It came back the next day. Clara never commented. She did not need to. Then Leo arrived at a full sprint and nearly ran into the lemon tree. He had been riding the eastern road. A refugee column was coming. He had counted roughly 300 people. Boro heard the number and came outside with all 4 abacuses. An hour later, another rider reached us. The 300 had become 800. Before sunset, a third report arrived. More wagons had joined from 2 villages farther east. The number was now somewhere above 2,000. I looked at Kesten's gate, then at our grain store, then at the road. 2,000 people were coming toward a town that had held 600 less than a month earlier. Clara saw a disaster. Vesha saw a fight between noble houses. Boro saw numbers moving faster than he could write them. I saw 2,000 credits walking toward me. Then the last scout returned with smoke behind him. They were not coming alone. The smoke belonged to Kelm's men. Not bandits this time. The scout had seen mounted troops behind the refugee column. 40 at least, probably more. They were riding slowly because they were letting the wagons exhaust themselves first. Smart. A tired column panics faster. Clara wanted the eastern gate closed until we knew who was coming. Vesha wanted the noble answer. Admit families with proof of property, send the rest south, and make Kelm explain himself to 3 different houses if he crossed the border. Boro wanted everyone to stop moving long enough to be counted properly. I wanted 2,000 citizens. The problem was that wanting them and keeping them alive were not the same thing. I rode east with Clara and 23 mounted volunteers, which was already more people than Kesten had possessed horses for 3 weeks earlier. We met the front of the column less than 4 miles from the gate. Lio had undercounted. That was not his fault. The road bent around a low ridge. I saw the first wagons, then a second line behind them. Then another group crossing a field farther north. Families had joined each other as they traveled. Old men walked beside carts. Children slept on grain sacks. 2 women pushed a broken handcart with a mattress tied across it. I saw 3 village bells lashed onto wagons, because someone had decided even the bells were not staying behind. These were not people taking a trip, they were leaving whole lives. A man near the front recognized the Kesten hearth ribbon on Clara's shoulder and started crying. That part stopped being funny very quickly. Their villages sat east of Danor. A border raid had burned 2 hamlets. Kelm's collectors then demanded winter levy from the survivors anyway. When the families tried moving west, road guards blocked them until several hundred people broke through at once. I asked the obvious question. Did they intend to stay in Kesten if we let them in? The answer came from the people before any leader could organize it. Heads nodded, hands went up. One woman pointed toward the smoke, and then toward our walls. Good enough for me. We turned the column toward Kesten. Clara rode beside me, and reminded me we did not have food for this. I knew. We did not have beds either. Or enough latrines. Or enough soldiers. The only thing we had was a rule nobody else understood. If these people entered Kesten tonight, and truly decided it was home, then sunrise would change everything. That made the next 10 hours more important than the next 10 weeks. I had 406 credits available. I could not fix the whole town. So I stopped thinking about the whole town. Water first. I spent 80 credits on the old western cistern, and another 60 on the public troughs near the eastern gate. Stone sealed. Rusted pipes cleared. Water started moving. Food second. I spent 100 on the communal ovens and grain mill. Not to create grain, but to make what we had usable faster. The mill wheel that had groaned for years turned cleanly enough that juries stared at it like it had insulted him personally. Space third. We opened the old wool warehouses, the abandoned guild hall, the chapel storehouse, and every empty public stable. People with houses took relatives. Returned families took strangers. Sister Anka marched out of the orphan house. Looked at the line of children, and informed me that my title did not matter if I blocked her doorway. I moved. She took 32 children inside. By dark, the town had become something completely different. Cooking smoke filled the square. Blankets hung from balconies. Wagons covered the outer yard. Boro had given up on exact counts, and was grouping households by colored chalk, because he had reached 7 too many times and become personally offended. Minister wore a green ribbon around his horns. I did not authorize that either. Then Clara brought me the soldier list. 17 original guards, 26 returned veterans or hunters willing to fight, 14 able-bodied refugees with military experience, Vesha's 4 household guards, a lot of people with axes. Not enough. The eastern road was still dark. That gave me time to do something Clara hated. I offered every Kesten soldier a real exit. Anyone who wanted to leave could take 1 horse if available, 3 days of food, and enough coin to reach Veza. No punishment, no shame. Families could go with them. Clara asked whether I was trying to empty my own wall before an attack. I explained the simple version. A man who stayed only because I would punish him for leaving was the wrong person to trust at a breach. The credit version was even simpler. Dead soldiers stopped paying forever. I did not explain that part. 2 men left. One had a pregnant wife. The other had lost a brother in the last Baron's service and had promised his mother he would not die for another lord. The remaining 15 original soldiers stayed. So did every returned veteran. By midnight, families had started bringing food to the wall without being asked. Clara stopped arguing about the exit offer. Far east of us, Kelm's captain received a report that should have made him slow down. It did the opposite. His scout had seen thousands of refugees outside Kesten's wall before sunset, and assumed the gates were closed. The captain believed he could catch the column trapped against the town, scatter it, and prove Milo Serrat could not protect anyone. He sent that assumption back to Kelm. Kelm ordered the attack before sunrise. Neither man knew most of the refugees were already sleeping inside my walls. The first arrow hit just after 1 in the morning. It struck the timber above the gate and stuck there burning. Clara kicked over the prepared water bucket before I even reached the wall. More fire arrows followed. The eastern slope lit orange. Then the riders came through the dark. There were 63 mounted men, 12 heavier infantry, and something behind them that made the horses move sideways. At first, I thought it was a wagon. Then it broke one of the old stone road markers with its shoulder. The beast was taller than a horse and twice as wide. Heavy natural plates covered its head and back. An iron harness wrapped its chest. 2 men walked behind it, holding control chains, while another drove spikes into the harness to keep it moving. I had never seen one before. I did not need a name for it. I watched it hit the outer gate brace. The timber cracked on the first impact. That told me everything I needed. If it reached the gate 3 or 4 more times, the gate was gone. Clara shouted orders down the wall. Vesha had traded her court coat for fitted armor and stood near the north tower, with one gloved hand resting on her rapier. The first enemy climber reached the wall. A red-violet line flashed across Vesha's rings. She touched his sword with 2 fingers. The steel rusted from guard to point in less than a second. The blade snapped when he swung. I revised my opinion of her. She noticed. That seemed to make her happier than the broken sword. The beast hit the gate again. The eastern hinge tore loose. I had 166 credits left. Sunrise was still several hours away, so I spent 40 on my legs and shoulders. The warmth ran through muscle and bone. The next time the beast hit, I was already below the wall. Clara came after me. I told her to stay above. She ignored that with impressive speed. We braced the inner gate with a timber beam, while Jury and 6 others dragged another into place. One of Kelm's men pushed through the gap. Clara dropped him before he took 2 steps. Another reached me with a spear. I caught the shaft, twisted, and pulled him into the gate hard enough to knock the air from him. That felt unfair. Good. The beam bent. I heard people screaming in the street behind us. The whole thing became very simple. We did not need to win the night. We needed to reach morning. I spent another 60 credits on the gate braces. Gold lines moved across the public timber. The grain tightened. The iron bands pulled flush. The next impact still shook my teeth, but the beam held. Clara looked at it, then at me. She understood the timing now, even if she did not understand the source. We held. The enemy tried the north wall. Vesha stopped 2 climbers, and her guards pushed the rest back with stones and hooked poles. They tried fire at the southern storehouse. Refugees formed a bucket line before our soldiers reached it. They tried the gate again. Jury took a crossbow bolt through the apron and into his side. He went down without a joke. Marta's assistants dragged him back, while his apprentices kept the beam in place. I wanted to spend credits on him. I could not. He was not public property, and he was not me. My power had limits. For the first time, I hated one of them. So I did the only useful thing I could. I made sure the clinic stayed standing. The remaining credits went into the infirmary roof, water line, and doors. Then I had none. For the next 2 hours I fought like everyone else. The people on the wall had seen the gold. They knew I could do things they could not explain. Then they saw me run out of whatever it was, and keep carrying stones. Clara bled from a cut above her eyebrow. Vesha lost one sleeve to a blade. Boro appeared once with a bucket, realized he was on the wrong side of the square, and vanished again. The beast kept hitting the gate. The sky finally started turning gray. I felt the first change before the sun itself appeared. My citizen count was no longer 781. It climbed so fast I could not follow the individual jumps. 1,000, 1,400, 2,000, then past 2,500. People were waking inside Kesten and deciding this was home. Not because I had signed a document, because they had spent one terrible night behind our wall, and we had not thrown them back outside. The final number settled at 2,906. Then, the credits arrived. I almost laughed. Clara grabbed my arm because she thought I had finally lost my mind. I touched the wall. The first 1,000 credits went into the eastern fortification. Warm gold spread through the stone in a wave. Cracks closed, mortar tightened. The old timber walkways thickened under soldiers' boots. The leaning gate tower straightened enough to knock loose dust from its roof. The enemy stopped cheering. I spent 600 on the infirmary, public armor stores, and gatehouse. Then I spent 500 on myself. That was the first time the power truly scared me. My body changed without changing shape. The pain in my throat disappeared. The bruise stayed. The scar stayed. But strength settled into me so quickly that the timber beam under my hand suddenly felt light. The beast hit the gate again. This time I walked outside. Clara tried to follow. I told her what I was about to do. She clearly thought it was a terrible plan. She also knew I had been right too many times that night. She stayed at the breach. The beast charged. I did not dodge. That was not bravery. I wanted to know how strong I was. Its plated head hit both my hands. My boots slid 6 feet through mud. The world went white for a second. Then I stopped moving. So did the beast. The men behind it stared. I stared too. I had expected to survive. I had not expected that. The beast pushed again. I pushed back. I stepped to the side, grabbed the iron harness, and pulled hard enough to turn its head into the stone gatepost. The first impact cracked the plate above its eye. The second dropped it. Nobody on either side moved for a moment. Then Kelm's captain ordered retreat. That reaction mattered more than the staring. His riders turned. His infantry ran. The men holding the beast's chains left them in the mud. Clara's soldiers did not chase far. I did not let them. We had won by surviving. There was no reason to turn that into dead citizens. The gates closed again. For about 30 seconds, the square was silent. Then 2,000 people started making noise at once. I heard my name from somewhere near the well. Then from the refugee warehouses. By breakfast, the Saint of Kesten was no longer a local joke. I did not know that yet. I was busy checking whether Jury was alive. He was. Marta had removed the bolt. It had missed his liver by less than an inch. I sat beside the bed until he woke. He asked whether the chickens had survived the attack. I told him yes. He looked disappointed. That was when I knew he was going to be fine. Vesha received her own test the next morning. An Orden escort arrived with 6 armed riders and a sealed order from her father, telling her to return home immediately. Kelm was already complaining about her presence in Kesten, and her father had decided the inspection was over. The order gave her a clean exit before the border turned into open war. It also came with her family signet. The signet proved she could negotiate in Ordan's name. Giving it back meant giving her father the power to cut her out of future arrangements completely. For once, I thought the sensible choice was obvious. Vesha listened to the escort captain, removed the rose gold signet from her hand, and placed it inside the return packet. Then she sent the riders home without her. She sent back 2 travel trunks as well. The bed, writing desk, wardrobe, weapon rack, lemon tree, and 14 servants stayed. Clara watched the escort disappear down the road. Then she looked at me. I told her I had not asked for any of this. It did not help. Vesha had just traded a safe exit, her right to speak for her family, and a very comfortable future, for the right to remain in a town that had been on fire the night before. She still called it an inspection. The inspection now had curtains. We buried 4 people that afternoon. 2 Kesten soldiers. 1 refugee man who had taken an arrow while carrying water. 1 woman who died from wounds she had received on the road before she ever saw our gate. Nobody joked during the burial. I knew exactly what those deaths had cost me in future credits. I hated that I knew. I also knew their names. That was worse. One of the dead soldiers had a mother in the south quarter. The refugee man had 2 daughters sleeping in the old wool hall. The woman from the road had made it through the gate alive, and still never got to see Kesten in daylight. Numbers had been easier when I did not know who was inside them. That night I went to Marta's clinic to check Yuri, and stayed longer than I meant to. A feverish boy from the refugee column had kicked off his blanket. I put my coat over him because the room was cold, then sat at Marta's side table with Boro's household lists, and tried to work out how many beds we would need before winter. I woke with my face against my own arm. Clara was standing in the doorway. She looked at the lists, then at the boy under my coat, then at me. I immediately explained that sick children were bad for future credits. Her expression somehow became softer and more suspicious at the same time. That was unfair. I had used perfectly good arithmetic. At the same time, Royal Inspector Celso Arnau was leaving Orsena 12 days earlier than scheduled. The Crown had received 3 different versions of Kesten. Tomas's contact said we were starving. Kelm's office said I was stealing subjects and causing border disorder. A Veza merchant report said Kesten had the busiest refugee road in the region and was buying every spare wagon axle within 30 miles. Celso trusted none of them, so he packed his document case and came to count for himself. I had no idea he was already on the road. The next morning I went back to work. Not because I had discovered a new philosophy. We simply had nearly 3,000 people in a town built for less than 1,000, and feelings did not make roofs. The difference was that I stopped calling deaths acceptable losses, even inside my own head. The refugees gave me another reward the morning after the burial. Boro had finally finished a rough household count. I expected mouths, hands, and future credits. Then Marta found 2 trained healers in the old wool hall. Jury found a wagon wright, 3 smiths, and enough apprentices to start arguing about forge space before breakfast. 2 men asked where we kept the millstones, because both had run mills in their old villages. A group of masons had slept in the public stable, because nobody had known what they were the night before. I had expected labor. That changed the next 2 weeks. We fixed only the things thousands of people could share. The mill, the clinic, drainage, the eastern wall, the market road. Every sunrise gave me more credits. The people those credits protected made Kesten more useful. Then, more people came. Kelm had tried to send me a refugee crisis. He had sent me half the workforce I needed to outgrow him. He had expected the failed attack to frighten the refugees. Instead, survivors carried a better story down every road. They had reached Kesten under pursuit. Kesten opened its gates. Kesten did not hand them back. Kesten survived the night, and the strange young lord had walked outside at dawn and stopped a siege beast with his hands. Leo did not need to exaggerate that one. Within a week, the beast was apparently twice as large, and I had killed it with 1 finger. I told him that was ridiculous. He agreed, and changed it to 2 fingers. I considered assigning him to latrine duty. Boro argued that would waste the best rumor network we had. Boro understood rumor better than most nobles. He did not invent stories. He simply knew which ones people were already carrying, which roads carried them fastest, and which families others trusted. I had thought I hired a census clerk. What I actually had was a man who could map where people wanted to go before the nobles controlling those roads noticed. Minister remained a goat. Celso was already on the road by then. Before he reached us, I had another problem. A little town called Merena sat north of our border under Kelm's authority. About 900 people, a grain mill, 2 good wells, 1 bad wall, and a road junction I wanted very much. I had never been there. Then 6 of its elders arrived at Kesten after midnight. They did not ask for grain. They asked whether my protection applied to people who were not yet mine. That was a much more interesting question. Kelm had increased levies again after the failed attack. He had also arrested 2 families accused of helping refugees escape. Morena's people expected him to place a permanent garrison there before winter. The elders wanted out. Clara warned me that taking the town by force would start a regional war before the royal inspection. I agreed. Vesha pointed out that refusing the town would tell every frightened village that Kesten's mercy ended at the border. I agreed with that too. Boro wanted to know Morena's exact household count. Of course he did. I asked the elders one question instead. If Kelm withdrew tomorrow, would Merena still choose Kesten? They did not answer immediately. Good. I did not want fear alone. Fear could move people for a night. Credit required home. They eventually said yes. Kesten's road was open. Their sons had seen our soldiers return alive. Refugees were already finding work. And unlike Kelm, I had not increased taxes after doubling population. That last part was not compassion. I simply preferred 1 credit every sunrise to 1 coin every harvest. Nobody needed to know that. I would not cross into Merena with an army. Clara would move 30 defenders to our side of the road junction and keep a clear escape corridor. The elders would go home and decide openly whether the town wanted to act. If they opened their own gate and requested protection, I would accept. If they did not, Kesten stayed where it was. No siege, no secret takeover, no complicated legal trick. People chose, or they did not. Kelm's local garrison made the decision easier for them. 3 days later, his captain ordered the arrest of another elder. The town bell rang before dawn. Merena's residents surrounded their own gatehouse. The 12 Kelm soldiers stationed there faced hundreds of townspeople and made the sensible choice to leave through the north postern. By the time Clara and I reached the road junction, Merena's main gates were open. Nobody had broken them. That was the best part. Hundreds of people stood in the road waiting. I crossed with only Clara, Boro, and 10 guards. The old Kelm banner came down. A green hearth ribbon went up. At that exact moment, Count Davor Kelm stopped being angry about taxes and started being afraid of me. He had lost a town without losing a battle. That broke his model. A stronger army would have made sense to him. So would bribery or rebellion. A town opening its own gate did not. He needed an explanation that let him keep believing the old rules still worked. By evening, his letters described me as a possible illegal devotion mage using public miracles to influence subjects. That was wrong. It was also dangerous. A normal border dispute could be ignored by the crown. Forbidden mass influence could not. Kelm sent the complaint west. Then he sent troops south. The troops worried me less than the complaint. Merena added 874 citizens to my count by the next sunrise. Not all 900. 26 people left before dawn because they wanted nothing to do with Kesten or war. That was fine. Actually, it was better than fine. It proved something I had been hoping was true. The power did not care where a border stone stood. It cared about choice. I spent Morena's first credits on its wells, gatehouse, and road junction. Then the absurd part happened. The town built a shrine. Not a large one, just a little stone box beside the south road with a painted green roof and a carved picture of me standing by a well. The face looked nothing like me. I ordered it removed. The elders removed it immediately. 2 days later, there were 3 smaller ones in private gardens. I asked why. Boro explained that people had interpreted my refusal as proof I was too humble to accept public worship. I stared at him. He stared back. Minister ate a ribbon. I gave up for the day. Clara did not. Her royal transfer papers arrived that evening. Celso's office had offered her a promotion to deputy frontier captain in Veza. Better pay, more soldiers, a clean barracks, no collapsing walls. The order would remove her from Kesten before Kelm's complaint reached the capital. It was a good offer. She had earned it years before I arrived. I told her she should take it if she wanted it. That was not a test. Kesten no longer depended on one commander. We had returned veterans now. Vesha could fight. I could fight. Clara had already given enough to a town that had barely fed her. She took the papers and left my study. The next morning, her horse was saddled in the courtyard. Her bags were tied behind it. I hated how much I noticed. I went to the wall, because Kelm scouts had been seen near the north road. Clara was already there. She handed the folded transfer papers to the royal courier and sent him away without her. She did not make a speech. She simply took command of the North Tower and asked how many riders the scouts had counted. I was glad she stayed. I left it at that. Vesha found out an hour later. Her reaction was to move the second desk back into my study. I removed it again. By then we were close enough to day 90 that everyone could feel it. Kesten had more than 4,000 residents across the barony and Merena. The market road was busy. The grain problem had eased, because harvest wagons were finally reaching us. Our walls were stronger. Our soldiers had armor that fit. But Kelm's complaint had reached Orsena before Celso reached us. And Kelm was moving a real force. The first proof came from a village north of Merena. A boy arrived on a blown horse with one arm tied against his chest. He could barely get the words out. Kelm's force had tested its new siege beast on their gate. I did not wait for a description. Clara and I rode north with 8 soldiers. The village was less than an hour away. We smelled wet stone dust before we reached it. Its gate had been built from blocks thick enough that 2 men could stand on the top course. The center was gone. Not cracked, gone. Stone had been driven into the lane behind it. One draft horse lay dead beside a cart with a block through its ribs. There were 2 deep grooves in the road where the beast's front plates had scraped after impact. A blacksmith from the village showed me a torn piece of the harness. The iron was thicker than my thumb. The first beast had nearly broken Kesten's gate. This one had gone through stone. Kelm had not repeated his last attack. He had learned. On the ride home, Clara asked whether I was worried. I was. Good. I would plan for the beast I had actually seen, not the one I wanted him to send. Celso Arnau arrived while the ruined gate dust was still on my boots. Day 88. He did not arrive with trumpets. He arrived in a slate blue travel coat covered in road dust, carrying a hard document case, and looking tired of everyone before he met us. He spent his first hour doing something I respected immediately. He ignored me. He drank from the well. He checked clinic beds. He picked 3 houses from Boro's records and knocked on the doors himself. Then he walked the market and asked families why they stayed. He also found the private shrines. That part was unfortunate. I told him I had ordered the original removed. He looked at the 3 replacements. His face did not move. I could feel him becoming suspicious in several directions at once. The next day he went to Merena. He returned after dark with mud on his boots and a very different expression. Morena's people had told the same story separately. Nobody had been enchanted. Nobody had been paid to stay. They had chosen Kesten because Kelm's soldiers took sons and grain, while ours brought wounded soldiers home. That last detail mattered. Our casualty rate from the refugee attack had spread farther than any victory boast. People did not just know we had won. They knew most of our soldiers survived. Families cared about that. Celso started asking how I had built that kind of loyalty in less than 3 months. I did not have a complicated answer. I bought armor before statues. I built an infirmary before a banquet hall. I let men leave before a fight. Then, most of them stayed. What I did not learn until I read Celso's report later was that he asked Clara the same question while I was away inspecting the ruined village gate. Instead, she showed him the 2 paid departure receipts from the soldiers who had left before the refugee siege, then took him through the wall section where the other men had chosen to stay. Her answer was not that they loved me. It was that they believed I would spend stone, coin, and whatever strange power I had before I spent them. Celso wrote that down too. Kelm attacked the next morning. Day 90. Of course he did. His timing was good. If Kesten looked unstable while the royal inspector was present, the crown could revoke my title without needing to decide whether any of his accusations were true. He sent 140 soldiers, 20 riders, 3 field mages, and the plated siege beast. This time there were no plaincoats. Now, Kelm could not pretend this was a bandit problem. Celso stood on the wall beside me and watched them form outside bow range. He asked whether I intended to negotiate. I told him Kelm had already given me his answer with a burned wagon. Celso did not ask again. The field mages moved first. One raised a slab of earth under the northern wall hard enough to crack stone at the base. Another sent fire across the ditch. The third covered the beast in a layer of gray magic that made arrows turn aside. Good, now I knew what they could do. I had more than 4,000 daily credits coming in, and a reserve I had been saving for exactly this kind of stupidity. I spent 800 on the damaged wall and ditch. The ditch deepened. The enemy mage stopped casting for a second. I spent 500 on the public armory. Bowstrings tightened. Shield rims hardened. Spearheads brightened. Then I spent 1,000 on myself. The world sharpened. I heard the beast's chain before I saw its handlers release it. It charged. This time nobody had to ask whether I planned to meet it. Clara moved the gate defenders back before I asked. 3 months earlier she had questioned almost every order I gave. Now she saw where I was going, hated it, and cleared the space anyway. Vesha climbed onto the wall above me and started breaking the gray protection with her curse rings. Celso tried to stop me from going outside. Clara stopped him from stopping me. I appreciated that. The gate opened just wide enough for one person. I walked through. The beast lowered its steel-capped head. It had smashed a stone gate 2 days earlier. I had the survivor standing 50 feet behind me as proof. The animal hit the ground so hard on its first stride that mud jumped around its feet. Then it reached me. I caught the horn below the steel cap with my left hand and the harness with my right. The impact drove me backward. 10 feet, 5 more. Then I stopped. The beast kept pushing. I did not move. One of Kelm's field mages shouted something. Vesha's curse broke the gray shield above the beast's shoulder. I shifted my grip. Then I lifted. Not the whole animal. I was not that ridiculous yet. Just enough to take its front feet off the ground. I turned and drove its steel-capped head into the packed road. The cap buckled. The beast collapsed. The Kelm line stopped advancing. Celso dropped his document case. I remember that because the sound was very small compared to everything else. Then, Clara ordered the archers forward. Our first volley landed among Kelm's front rank. Vesha broke one mage's staff with a curse that ran along the middle bands. The Kelm commander looked from the dead beast to the repaired wall to Celso standing under royal insignia. He made the only sensible decision left. He ordered withdrawal. We did not chase them beyond the border markers. Again, I was starting to develop standards. The official inspection happened an hour later, because Celso apparently believed almost being besieged was not a valid reason to delay paperwork. I respected him more for that too. He certified Kesten as a viable frontier barony. Not prosperous, not stable enough to stop watching, but viable, growing, and above the required tax capacity. More importantly, his report stated that Merena had joined through voluntary local action, and that Kelm's force had crossed toward Kesten under arms during a royal inspection. Celso's report forced the crown to act. Kelm was no longer a neighboring lord complaining about migration. He was the man who had marched armed troops into a growing royal barony while the crown's own inspector stood on the wall. The crown could no longer treat Kesten as a dead place nobody cared about. Kelm was ordered to explain himself. I was ordered to remain under observation. That was fine. Observation brought visitors. That evening, I stood on the repaired eastern wall with Clara. The rope scar at my neck had faded, but had not disappeared. Below us, the town no longer looked empty. Lights filled streets that had been dark when I arrived. Children ran between warehouses that had become homes. Soldiers ate near the gate with their families. Marta's clinic had every bed occupied, but most patients were recovering instead of dying. Clara leaned against the stone beside me. She asked whether I had expected any of this when I cut the 12 grain thieves free. I considered lying. Then, I told her the truth. I had expected 12 credits. She already knew I had some strange way of measuring people. She did not know the full rule. She just shook her head and looked down at the town. Then, she touched the old rope mark at my neck with 2 fingers, very lightly, and let her hand fall. That was all. It did more damage to my ability to think than the siege beast. I went back to the manor 10 minutes later because armies were easier. Vesha was waiting in my study. So was the second desk. I removed it for the 3rd time. The next morning, there were 2 letters on my table. One was from the crown, confirming the inspection result. The other came from 4 villages north of Merena. They did not ask for grain. They did not ask for soldiers. They asked what they had to do to become citizens of Kesten. Boro read the letter over my shoulder and quietly brought out the serious abacus. I checked my citizen count. 5,412. Then I looked through the window at the road. More wagons were already coming. 3 months earlier, the king had sent me to Kesten because everyone expected the place to kill me. Now people were crossing county lines to live under me on purpose. I had been thinking about expansion the wrong way. I did not need to march into every town and take it. If people wanted Kesten badly enough, some towns might open the gate themselves, and every group that chose us would make the next one easier to protect. I was smiling when Leo ran into the courtyard shouting about another shrine. This one was larger. I went outside and ordered it removed immediately. By sunset, work on it had doubled. I had 5,412 citizens. I had a growing army and a royal inspector watching me. Count Kelm was preparing his next move. Clara had chosen to stay. Vesha had chosen to stay much more aggressively. Boro now owned 4 abacuses, and Minister still had no respect for government. For the first time in my life, things were going very well. That should have worried me more than it did.